Okay, so to assign the player a team, if you remember, we added the team here in our player state, right there, player team. But we actually have to get that all set up in our game state. So let's do that. All right, so we had logic basically that we talked about before, where we wait for the game state. Let's see if we can borrow what we've already done to make this process a little quicker. Okay, so here we have in our capture point, we basically we're waiting for the game state. We're waiting for our cached variables to be ready. Now, I thought about this a lot. Yeah, I could have, we could have inherited some of this functionality from a base class, but we would be having to do it on some classes and not for others. Like our player state isn't going to be inherited from our base actor class that we would make here, so it would make, it wouldn't help us here. And then I thought, well, I could make a component that does it, but the deal is everybody besides maybe the player state is going to need to get their cached variables in a different way. So, for example, you would go about getting the player state from the character differently than you would go about getting the player state from the controller. And so because there's all these unique nuances, I don't see a problem with doing some copy and paste of code in certain places. It's looked at as generally to be avoided whenever possible. You really shouldn't be copy pasting code when it doesn't have to be duplicated if it's going to be shared. But in this case, we're building the foundational things for all these actors. And eventually, once this is totally developed, these functions will appear far more unique in a way that copy and paste, in a way that functions being the same across the board would not be functional. And I'm taking a long time to say that in this situation, copy paste is okay because we're going to do some unique things with it. And even in this tutorial, if it doesn't get unique, when you expand the functionality here, when you expand the game, whether it be the player state, the capture point, you're going to have so many unique variables that are going to need to be stored prior to the game starting that it's okay to have some copy pasted events, basically a waiting timer to make sure everything is initialized. So that's what we're going to do here. At least that's how I justify it in my mind. Maybe somebody looking at your code disagrees. Maybe you disagree. That's fine. But this is a way that I know will work, and I've done it before, and I don't think it's too much copy paste. So all that said, let's start copying and pasting. So let's grab this main function right here, this main event. And then let's take that over to our player state. Okay, this will come up. It's like, hey, do we have this? Let's just say do nothing. Okay, and so then let's drag off our begin play and let's type in wait for variables to be cached right here. Get off our tick. We don't need it right now. I would disable it, but I don't know what future development you're going to do on this. You could save a little bit by disabling tick. We're not using it, which is the important thing. Add call to parent function. Okay, and to be consistent, let's just add a begin play. A little color to it. Okay, cool. Yeah, begin play. Wait for cached variables. Okay, so we don't have a game state, so we want one. That's a copy paste node. That's why it's blurred out. But we need to promote it to a variable. And when you do that, it spaces it out here. Just fix that. There you go. And then you don't have to worry about that. So just reconnect it, hook it up. And then we need to make an event. Okay. Will that fix itself? Does not. That's fine. Just delete that. That. Okay. Let's double check our work here. Begin play. Wait. Go through here. Fail. Wait for variables. Fail, 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 succeed. Catch variables ready. Cool. All right. It's good to kind of run that logic through your head. All right. And cool. Okay, and as before, this stuff is running on the client and the server, so let's go ahead and put this here because we just want to run some logic on the server. The reason I allow it to run on the client and the server is because you may have future development where you want to have the game state ready to go, and I don't want you to have to be like, oh, okay, we only did that on the server, now I got to go back and fix this on the client, yada, yada, yada. No, let's not mess with it. Got to future-proof a little bit. We don't want to do that too much, but in cases like that, it's not a bad thing to do. So let's convert this to a validated get. Okay, and what do we want to do with our game state? Well, we want to assign the player, this guy, we want to assign our player here, a player team. So to do that, we need to go to our game state. And we're going to make a function called assign player to team. Darn it, the 2 did not capitalize. I swear I got an issue with my shift button. Every time I buy a new keyboard, there's always an issue. Okay. All right, and with this one on our input, we're going to use a player state. Whoa, look at that. It's a map still. It remembered what we had before. Let's change it to capture flag player state. Oh, that just did that one. I want to change singleton. Here, let's do that again. There we go. Capture flag player state object reference. Okay. And we're just going to say in player state. Cool. Got our player. And just so I don't forget, like I said, it's very common to forget these things. Sorry, come over to our player state, and then we're going to go from here, and we're going to call that function assign player to team, and we're going to send our self to it. So over here, reference to self, you could type in self, you could say this, whatever. Same thing. All right, so we're going to assign our self to the team. Okay, so we are here in our game state, and we're going to give this player a team. Now, we wouldn't want the player state himself to be giving himself his own team, so that's why we come to the game state to do that. It makes sense to run the logic here. Let's make sure we actually gave it something valid. Now, this is definitely a place you would want to have an isValid check just because player states come and go. The only thing more common would be maybe the character. Let's say a player logs out. You definitely want to check it there. Let's get the team that they have already assigned, which by default is going to be no team. And check that it is in fact no team. The reason I do this is a lot of things on initialization will get called twice. It's very common for begin play to get called multiple times on both the client and the server. So there's no guarantee. So we might have already set the team, and then we're going to be doing, you will be comparing against the existing teams, and if you're already counted in there, it's not going to be quite right. Okay, and so what we need to do is we need to find the team with the least amount of players. So I don't believe we've created that function yet. So let's go ahead and do it. Let's see, find team with least players. So it's going to be a simple team system, and basically how it works, as soon as somebody joins into the game. They just go to the team with the least players. I figure that's the fairest way without having some intricate, team assignment set up here. We're just trying to get the basics going. So what we're going to do is we're going to the cool thing about the game state, it has this array called the player array. Okay, and this is here by default. This is inherited, so it's always there, and it's just a record of all the current player states that there are. Now, there is some weirdness that goes on when you're dealing with arrays with Blueprint that won't allow us to pass things as they are straight into a function. So here, I'll just show you. I'll get the error going. Okay, so I want to create a team player count map, right? And so if I go into here just like this, I'll get an error. And it's saying it can't, it's read-only variable to a reference. Basically, it's saying it can't do it. And normally, I was like, okay, well, I'll just make a copy, right? That's what you would do in C++ code. You would just say, well, that's fine. I'll pass a const reference, and if I need to modify anything in here or do anything to this, I would just make a copy. But it doesn't do that, and you can't change it here. So the only workaround I found is to just make a local copy. Seems like it would kind of want to do that in native code anyway. It just seems like it's an extra step that we shouldn't have to do, but we're going to do it. So right-click, promote to a local variable, and call it players local. All right, I'll compile that. Then it's working fine. Okay, and so we already did this functionality here, and this is what I'm saying. We're reusing things, and it's pretty handy. So now we have a map containing all the teams with all the players, and we're going to do that to determine which team has the least players. So a map has a lot of cool functions to it. One thing we can do is we can get an array of all the values. So, a map has the keys and the values. Well, we just want to get the values, and all you got to do is press values or type values, and then you get your array of values, and then you can do the same thing for the keys, which are the first entry in the map. Not entry, but the first. You have the keys and the values left to right. So out of these values, what we're trying to do is find the minimum value in here, because it would be the team with the least players. So to do that really easily, we can just type in here, we can do min of int. C++ has great ways to filter things. We don't really have that option here. There's not a lot of filtering. There is a standard library that will allow you to do a lot of these things easier that we could download, but I don't want to add in a bunch of dependencies right here. I want to keep this as just basic Unreal Engine as possible. That way, if any of those things change down the road, that this tutorial won't be obsolete. So let's go ahead and continue on. We got the minimum value, and so what this spits out is it gives us the index, which it would be the minimum value of this index here. So that's the, your array, it'll count 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, however many entries. In our case, it'd be just 0 and 1 because we only have 2 teams. So it's going to spit out either a 0 or a 1, and that's going to be the value of the lowest team. All right, so let's save that off. Minimum players index, not the count, but the index of that array. And so we don't want to obviously return the index, and we don't want to return the values. We want to return the team, which are held in the keys. So to access that, first we're going to do a check. So we're going to say, hey, is, and it better be at this point, right? It better be a valid index, but we're going to do the check anyway. We're going to say, hey, the index, oh, almost made a mistake. And to avoid that mistake, what we can do, we could just do that right there. This is good for a number of reasons. it's not rerunning. You know how we talked earlier about pure functions? This makes it so this function's only running once. If I had this plugged into here like this, it's going to run twice. And let's say we did have a huge array, and it would have to go find the minimum value. It would have to loop through that entire array. So right here, and this is why I originally saved this in the first place, it's so it only has to run it one time. Okay, now that we know it's a valid index, which it has to be, then we can get the value. And you can either get a copy or a ref. I would say a copy. That makes more sense because we're only talking ints, and I think that's going to be cheaper. When it comes to references, and it's pretty obscured in Blueprint, but when it comes to references and values, you on the smaller things like ints and stuff like that, you want to do by value because it's going to take up less memory. Or it's either going to take up less memory, or it's not going to be a significant savings to make it a reference, because a reference is just pointing to an address, and to make that reference, that takes so much memory as well. But when you're dealing with ints, I think that the cheapest way to go is to just use actually a copy rather than a reference. And then we can return our team with the least players. So that'd be the enum, the team enum. Okay, minimum players. You can just pass it right in there. Okay. Okay, and so as I have said before, if you're going to do any sort of function with a return value in Blueprint, or in any code situation, C++ or this, you have to have a return value. Like I said, it won't bark at you, but you should return something for two reasons: to let you know that something's gone wrong, and to know what to expect with the return value. Because you're not, it's kind of undefined. So basically, what I'm saying is if you came through here, this said, no, it's not a valid index, it would end here, and what you would return, I don't know. The default values, I don't know. I want to define that. I want to say, hey, if this does fail, spit out no team. This would be a good point for you to put an error node right here. And do as we did before, make it red, put in all the function information, but in essence, for time here, I'm just going to just leave it as is. Okay, so back in our game state of our assign player to team function, we are going to call that function that we just made. So now we know the team with the least players. And we are going to set the players team. So we go off our player state, and we're going to say set player team, which will, we could do this. We could do this. But I don't want to do it because I don't like things outside of its own class setting. I don't like things outside. I don't want other classes setting things inside of other classes, if that makes sense. I want to be able to check when anything is ever calling something that influences the player's team. That's common practice, and that is so if, let's say, I have an issue with the player's team being set to something it's not supposed to be, and I got a million things setting the player team. Let's say we got various things in the world that could change your team buttons and other things that could do that. I want to be able to put a debug node where I set this in one place, and I will know everything that sets the team. So if I were just to willy-nilly right here, just set the value like this, I would have a million different things to check. So it makes sense to go back to our player state. and make a set player team function. And we can add additional checks here so we don't have those on-rep nodes firing off like crazy, because remember, the player team will call an on-rep node on the function every time it's called, and only on the clients when it changes. So to be consistent between the client and server, why don't we only set the value when the value changes? So let's do that. First step, you can add an authority check. That's great. We always should do that. So if player team is not equal to what? The input team. Drag that, put it right under there. Look at that, B. Okay. In player team. All right. So if these are not equal, then we want to set the value. Okay, get the player team. This is true. Set it here. So if you notice, it does a little byte to enum. It's interesting. This not equal node has this second one here as a byte. We don't want that. Let's get rid of that. We shouldn't have to be doing a transition. Let's change this instead of a byte to a player team enum. Or sorry, just team enum. Yeah. Team enum. Cool. Let's compile that, see if it's still a byte. Still a byte. Okay, so the comparison can do a byte. That's fine. I just don't want to have any of those. There we go. I didn't want it having to run another function, basically. Cool. Looks good. Okay, let's go back to our game state. Okay, so we were about to set the player team that way. Let's not do that. Just set player team. And we got our setter node. And we'll say, hey, function that we made, get the team, find the team with the least amount of players. Throw that in there. You know, I just thought about this, what we could do here. Make that const, because it doesn't change anything. Okay, one thing I wanted to do real quick is set the functions that I could as const. So find team with the least amount of players should be const. Create team player map. We can also make that const, just to add a little bit more clarity to what we're doing. Okay, so we found the team with the least players, and we're going to set the player team. Let's just clean up this these nodes here real quick. All right, that looks decent. Let's save everything we have so far.